My name is Chris. This happened years ago, and I'd pretty much buried it in the back of my mind until something recently dragged it back up. I was 17 that summer, working nights at a pizza place on the outskirts of my hometown. I wasn't excited about it, but I was broke and my parents would have murdered me if I'd gone another month without a job. So I took what I could get. It was the kind of place you work at only because nothing better is hiring. Sticky uniforms, dead-end shifts, and a beat-up delivery car that sounded like it might die on every hill. At least it wasn't my own car getting wrecked. The pizza was awful, legitimately terrible. I still don't understand how we stayed in business. If it hadn't been for the shiny touchscreen ordering system and the semi-decent dine-in area, I swear nobody sane would have eaten there. Of everything I left behind when I moved away, that place is what I miss the least, and that's saying something. The one upside was how slow it usually was. Whether it was the location, the quality of the food, or both, orders trickled in so rarely that most nights were almost silent. I won't bore you with what a typical shift looked like. It was a pizza place. You can picture it. One night I was restocking the fridge when the tablet buzzed with an online order. Large sausage and olive. I remember the olives because we almost never got requests for them. The address was way out of town, technically beyond our delivery area. I was already reaching to reject it when my manager, Russell, this 30-something guy who mostly sat in the back scrolling Reddit, glanced over and told me to take it. We hadn't had a run-in over an hour. I didn't argue. When the pizza came out of the oven, I punched the address into my phone, slapped the receipt Russell had printed onto the box, and headed for the door. It'd kill at least half an hour. As I stepped outside, I finally glanced at the delivery instructions he'd stapled to the box. I hadn't read them before. They said, exactly, park on the street behind the house, walk through the backyard, knock on the back door only. That gave me pause. My brain immediately came up with normal explanations. Maybe they didn't want to wake up a baby or an elderly relative by ringing the front bell. Maybe their front steps were torn up. Maybe they were sneaking food behind a parent's or spouse's back. Whatever. I was more worried about going back inside to fold boxes for another dead hour. So I decided not to overthink it. The second I got outside, though, I regretted having to go anywhere. It was one of those summer nights where the air feels like hot jelly, humid, completely still, and sour with that stale, sun-baked smell of plastic and dirt. I lasted maybe 2 minutes with the windows down before giving up and cranking the AC. The address was the opposite direction of downtown, even though the shop itself was already in the middle of nowhere. The drive was supposed to be about 25 minutes, but it felt longer with how empty the roads were. I'm exaggerating a bit. There were houses here and there, but they thinned out the farther I went. When I got close, I realized I was approaching from behind the house. The GPS had led me down this skinny side street that ran behind a row of backyards. No streetlights, no porch lights, just dark shapes of houses and yards bleeding together. I slowed way down to check the numbers. The place looked completely dead. No lights in the windows, no cars in the driveway. Just a sagging yard with tall grass and a warped wooden fence that didn't quite latch. Still, I followed the instructions. I pulled onto the gravel shoulder, grabbed the pizza, and walked up the slight hill into the backyard. I held the box in one hand and my phone's flashlight in the other, aiming it at my feet so I wouldn't trip over some hidden dip. At the top of the incline, I saw the back door. Old white wood, small glass pane at the top with a cheap curtain pulled across it. I knocked and waited. Nothing. I knocked again, louder this time, thinking about how Russell would blow up if I came back with an undelivered pizza. No answer. I was raising my hand to knock a third time when I saw the curtain twitch. Just a little. Like someone inside had brushed it with a fingertip. It was quick. If I hadn't been staring directly at the glass, I probably would have missed it. I waited, expecting whoever was standing on the other side to finally open up. Before they did, I noticed headlights wash across the backyard. 2 unmarked cars pulled up behind mine on the side street. My first thought was that I was about to get chewed out for trespassing. One of the doors opened and a man stepped out. Even at that distance, I could see he wasn't wearing a uniform, just regular clothes. He motioned for me to come over. I figured maybe he was the customer and I'd just beaten him home or something. As I walked closer, I realized he was holding something up. A badge. He was an undercover cop. As soon as I got close enough, he told me, flat and calm, to go back to my car and wait. That was all. No explanation, so I did. I backed away, climbed into the driver's seat, and watched through the windshield. That's when it hit me how many of them there were. Not two, five at least, maybe more. All in plain clothes, all with flashlights. None of them spoke. They moved in a loose formation around the house, staying low and deliberate, like they didn't want to be seen or heard. Nobody knocked. Nobody called out police. It felt like I was watching something I had absolutely no business seeing. One of the officers walked up to the same back door I'd just been at and carefully tested the handle. It didn't move. He nodded to one of the others and stepped back. The whole thing felt unreal. After a couple of tense minutes, the first officer came back to my window and crouched beside the car. I rolled it down. His eyes flicked to the pizza box on the passenger seat, and he let out a short sigh. He didn't tell me much. He seemed more careful than rude. He said there was an ongoing investigation involving that property and that he and the others were staking it out. Apparently, I'd pulled up right when they were repositioning their cars, which was why nobody stopped me sooner. I asked if he wanted to see the order. He nodded, so I pulled up the details on the app. The ticket showed the address, a phone number, and a first name, Jerry. He wrote the number down, but it didn't seem to help him much. Then he told me to leave. Immediately. I complained that my boss was going to flip because I was coming back with the pizza, but he just shrugged and repeated that I needed to go, already turning away. I was pissed, but what was I going to do? Argue with an entire undercover operation? I pulled out and headed back toward the shop. It took most of the drive for the weight of it to really hit me. Up until then it had felt bizarre but not necessarily dangerous. Then I started replaying the details. The silent house, the twitch of the curtain, the unmarked cars, the way none of them knocked. If the cops hadn't shown up when they did, I realized something very bad could have happened. I have no idea what. The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that the only reason the door never opened was because the person on the other side was scared of getting caught. But then why order a pizza at all, especially if you're under surveillance? Maybe they didn't know they were being watched, or maybe they did and I was some kind of test. Bait. A way to see if the cops were still there or if that side of the house was clear. The timing, the curtain, the silence. I'll never get an answer. Thinking about it is probably a waste of time anyway. I honestly would have forgotten the whole thing if an old high school friend hadn't brought it up a few weeks ago. At first, I didn't even remember what he was talking about. Maybe it's better if I forget again. But before that happens, I wanted to put it somewhere. Music. This next part happened just last year. I'm 40 now, married with 2 boys, Jordan 7 and Scott 5. I work in insurance, which is about as exciting as it sounds, but it's steady. And at this point in my life, that's all I really care about. A couple years ago, my dad died after a long fight with cancer. Among the things he left behind was a small beach house in Delaware that I'd never actually seen before, because he rented it out year-round. It's not big or fancy, but the location is incredible. 1 block from the boardwalk, with an upstairs back deck that looks out toward the ocean. That deck is my favorite part of the whole place. After he passed, we started going down every summer. A week here, a long weekend there. It became our little family getaway. My wife and I love it, but the boys love it even more. Hours on the beach, bikes on quiet streets, exploring the arcade and candy shops. It feels like something Dad left us so we could keep building memories. This took place during one of those trips last summer. We'd gone down in mid-July, Sunday through Friday, timing it so the crowds were thinner midweek. It was a Wednesday night. The boys had finally crashed around 9:30 after a long, sunburned day. My wife and I were on the upstairs deck, playing cards and sipping wine, listening to the muted sound of the ocean. That's when the slider opened and Jordan stepped out. He had this tight, uneasy look on his face. He said he kept hearing a scratching noise in his room, and it was keeping him awake. I looked at my wife, set down my glass, and told him I'd check it out. Old houses make weird sounds, and that place is definitely on the older side. Scott was asleep in his own room, and I didn't want to wake him if I didn't have to. I followed Jordan downstairs. He led me into his room and pointed at the wall near his bed, then put a finger to his lips, asking me to listen. At first, I didn't hear anything. I didn't want him to think I was brushing him off, so I just stood there quietly with him. After maybe 20 seconds, I heard it. Faint but unmistakable, a soft scratching from inside the wall. I crouched and pressed my ear against the plaster, expecting maybe a mouse up in the rafters, but the sound wasn't high up. It was low, down near the baseboards, like something was right on the other side. Then I heard breathing, not the quick, light scurry breath of an animal, slow, heavy human breathing. I jerked back and whispered "Jesus" before I could stop myself. And then from somewhere inside that wall came a scream. It wasn't loud in the usual sense. It was muffled by the wall, but it was the most guttural, furious sound I'd ever heard. It hit me so hard I yelled again, more from shock than anything. Every hair on my body stood on end. I grabbed Jordan's arm and yanked him out of the room. We ran down the hall to Scott's room. He was still dead asleep, limp on the bed. I didn't even bother waking him. I scooped him up and bolted. The only thing in my head was get upstairs, get to my wife, get outside. As we hit the base of the stairs, I shouted for her. I heard another scream behind me, much closer this time. I turned just long enough to see a man, filthy and wild-eyed, charging down the hallway straight at us. I nearly tripped trying to get up the stairs with both boys. Somehow, we made it to the top and onto the deck. I slid the glass door shut and locked it just as he slammed into it. For a second I was sure the glass would shatter. He started clawing and pounding at the door, shrieking, spitting out words I don't even want to repeat. I threw my weight against it, bracing it with my shoulder, and yelled for my wife to grab the kids and call 911. She pulled them back, covered their ears, and dragged them away from the sight of him. I stayed planted at the door, trying to block their view with my body. He was completely unhinged. His hands were filthy, smearing something, mud, grime, maybe blood, across the glass as he tried to wrench it open. He never stopped yelling. I don't know how long I held that door. A minute, maybe 5. It felt like hours. He never lost steam, and it took everything I had to keep that lock from giving. All I could think was that if the glass broke, it was going to be me between him and my family. Before it came to that, the police arrived. They must have come around the side, because out of nowhere 2 officers appeared in the house behind him. In a flash, one tackled him from behind while the other jumped in to help restrain him. After that, the night turns fuzzy in my memory. Once they had him in cuffs and dragged him outside, they came back in to get my statement. I told them everything, from the scratching to the scream to the man barreling down the hallway. Then the 3 of us did a sweep of the house, trying to figure out how he'd been in the walls and then out in the hallway that fast. That's when they found it. There's a crawl space entrance under the back porch, low to the ground, hidden, the kind of thing you'd never notice unless you were looking for it. From there, it leads into a standing height crawl space that runs alongside the foundation. Inside that crawl space, there's a second access point, a loose panel in the back of Jordan's closet. I had no idea any of that existed. I'd never done a full inspection after inheriting the place, never remodeled. It was one of those, we'll deal with it eventually, things I kept putting off. A few days later, a detective called to follow up and filled in the rest. The man had admitted he'd been living in that crawl space for months. He'd stumbled on the entrance during the off-season and decided to make it his new home. The plan, according to him, was to hurt my family that night for invading it. He'd been stealing food from our place, little things we apparently missed, and picking through neighbors' trash. We didn't go back for the rest of the summer. Not because I thought he'd somehow get out and return, but because none of us wanted to be there. The boys were terrified, my wife was shaken, so was I. I hired a crew to seal off the crawl space entrance completely, inside and out. Once that was finished, I finally felt like I could breathe again. We've been using the house this summer, and so far it's been normal, or as close to normal as it's going to get. I grew up in a rural area where you could ride your bike for miles without seeing another soul. Summer was always my favorite season. It still is, technically, but after moving to the city it lost some of its magic. So much of what I loved about summer was tied to that middle-of-nowhere feeling. The warmth, the silence, the sense that the world thinned out around you. It made me feel isolated in a good way, like that corner of earth was mine alone. I could vanish for hours and no one would notice. Summer nights were the best. The darkness amplified that privacy, that freedom. As a 16-year-old girl who craved space, it was perfect. Back then I had a friend named Taylor. She was more daring than me, always nudging boundaries in small ways. One random night in July, we decided to go stargazing. Just the two of us, 2 bikes and a bottle of cheap wine. It wasn't some big, unusual plan. We'd done variations of it plenty of times. Looking back, that was probably one of the last. We didn't pick a specific destination, just headed in the direction she suggested. She said she knew a good spot past the edge of town, abandoned farmland where nobody would bother us. We left around 10. I don't remember how long we biked, 20 minutes, 30. But we didn't stop until there was nothing remotely town-like around us anymore. At some point, Taylor braked and announced that we were there. Here didn't look like much, just a huge open field. No fences, no cows, no structures, just grass stretching out under an endless sky. It felt perfect. We spread a blanket, popped the cork with the opener she'd smartly brought, and passed the bottle back and forth. The wine was terrible, but it did what it was supposed to do. We lay there, pointing out constellations we vaguely remembered from school, keeping our eyes peeled for shooting stars. That was always the unspoken goal. At one point Taylor asked if I thought we'd actually see one. I told her probably not, but to keep looking. Out there you see tons of stars, more than you ever do in the city, but you still need some luck to catch a meteor. Whether we saw one or not, it was one of those nights that felt endless in the best way. The wine buzzed pleasantly in my head, the air was warm, and time felt kind of irrelevant. There was this brief moment I still think about sometimes. We were leaning back, side by side, and she looked at me in a way that made me wonder, more strongly than I ever had, if she wanted something beyond friendship. I'd always suspected that about her a little, mostly out of curiosity, but that night it felt more intentional. I didn't say anything. Where we grew up, that kind of conversation didn't come easily. And maybe I was just tipsy and reading too much into a look. Either way, the moment slipped past. She cracked a joke, we laughed, and then we both looked up just in time to see a shooting star streak across the sky. If you've ever seen one, you know the reaction is almost automatic. You laugh, you shout, you point it out like the other person couldn't possibly have missed it. We both burst out giggling and she told me to make a wish. I don't remember what I wished for, probably something small and dumb. We settled back into the blanket, talking and watching the sky. Seeing that shooting star put this light, happy spin on the whole night. At some point, I closed my eyes. Not to sleep, just for a few seconds to soak in the feeling of the breeze on my face and the quiet all around us. I swear they were shut for no more than 5 seconds. When I opened them, Taylor was gone. Not off to pee behind a bush, gone. Gone. There was just the empty blanket next to me and a few feet away my bike. Hers was nowhere. I sat up fast, heart jumping, expecting her to pop up laughing from somewhere nearby. But when I turned in a full circle, there was nothing. No silhouette, no sound, just the empty field in every direction. A heavy, cold fear rolled over me. The perfect, open field that had felt so free a second earlier suddenly felt too big and too empty. The night around me seemed wrong. The stars looked dimmer. That's the part that really sticks with me. The sky was still thick with them, but they felt muted, like someone had turned down the brightness. The air was cooler too, but not in the natural, it's later now way. More like I'd stepped sideways into a slightly different version of the same place. None of that makes sense, I know. I'm just trying to explain the feeling. I pulled out my phone to check the time. 3 a.m. exactly. That timestamp is burned into my brain. We hadn't even hit midnight when I'd last checked. I stared at the screen, blinking, half convinced I'd somehow misread it. Maybe I'd actually fallen asleep and was just confused. But even if I had, would Taylor really have left me alone, miles from anywhere in the middle of the night? Without waking me up, she wouldn't. Not in a million years. I called her name over and over, spinning in circles, but there was no answer. The only remotely logical explanation was that she'd gotten annoyed or bored, woken me up and I'd forgotten, or she'd just left on her own. But none of that lined up with how the night had felt. We hadn't fought. The whole vibe had been good, really good. I called her phone, straight to voicemail. I tried again. Nothing. That's when I started crying. I don't think anyone would blame me. Eventually, I grabbed my bike, wiped my face, and started riding home. That ride back was the longest, scariest I'd ever done. Every shadow felt too deep, every rustle too close. I didn't stop until I finally coasted into my own driveway, lungs burning. I went to bed without even changing. I guess I just wanted to be somewhere familiar, somewhere with walls. First thing the next morning, I texted Taylor. I was braced for a pissed-off message or an apology, anything that would make sense of it. Instead, she was the one demanding an explanation. Her first text, "Where the hell did you go last night?" I told her what I remembered, that I'd closed my eyes for a second, opened them to find her and her bike gone, checked the time and panicked. I said I'd assumed she'd ditched me. That's when she sent the part that still makes my stomach flip when I think about it. She said she was the one who'd woken up alone at 3 a.m. She said I was the one who vanished. According to her, she'd opened her eyes, seen my bike still there but me gone, and waited over an hour, expecting me to come back. Eventually, she'd given up, biked home angry and confused, and decided I'd bylate on her for some unknown reason. She swore I'd just disappeared, and I was just as convinced the exact same thing had happened to me. We spent a while going in circles, trying to piece together a timeline. Neither of us had any memory gaps besides that one weird break. We both remembered trying to call the other, but when we checked our phone logs, there were no missed calls, no records at all. At some point, we stopped talking about it. It was easier than admitting how terrified we both were. I know I was. For months after, I'd lie in bed at night and stare out the window at the stars, thinking about that field and that strange, frozen moment in time. Taylor and I went stargazing maybe once or twice more after that, but it was never quite the same. Eventually, we drifted apart like people do. Life happened. We lost touch. Even now, I have no explanation for any of it. I don't consider myself especially superstitious, but anyone I've told this story to jump straight to the paranormal. Maybe they're right. I don't like thinking about it too hard. Sometimes I wonder if she just lied to me, but that doesn't really make me feel better either. What I'm left with is this heavy, unsettled feeling that something happened to us that night, something we'll never be able to understand or even remember clearly. I haven't spoken to Taylor in years, but I'd bet anything that she still thinks about it too. I know I do.